Mortal Engines by Philip Reeve. Part 1, Chapter 9. The Jenny Haniver. At first, it looked as if their luck might hold. They scrambled quickly across the dimly lit walkway and down into the shadows under one of Speedwell's wheel arches. They could see the dark bulks of other towns with lights burning in their windows and a big bonfire on the top deck of one of them. A mining townlet on the far side of the cluster, where a noisy party was in progress. They crept along the outside edge of Speedwell to a place where a gangplank stretched across to the market town, which was parked next door. It was unguarded, but brightly lit, and as they reached the far end and stepped onto the deck of the market town, a voice somewhere behind them shouted, "Hey!" and then louder, "Hey! Hey! Uncle Rayland! Them slaves escaping!" They ran, or rather, Tom ran, and dragged Hester along beside him, hearing her whimper in pain at every step. Up a stairway, along the catwalk, past a shrine to Peripatia, goddess of wandering towns, and they were in a market square, lined with big iron cages, in some of which thin, miserable slaves were waiting to be sold off. Tom forced himself to slow down and try to look inconspicuous, listening all the time for sounds of pursuit. There were none. Maybe the Raylands had given up chase, or maybe they weren't allowed to chase people onto other towns. Tom didn't know what the rules were in a trading cluster. "Head for the bows," said Hester, letting go his arm and pulling the collar of her coat up to hide her face. "If we're lucky, there'll be an air harbour at the bows." They were lucky. At the front of the town's top deck was a raised section where half a dozen small airships were tethered, their dark, gas-filled envelopes like sleeping whales. "Are we going to steal one?" Tom whispered. "Not unless you know how to fly an airship," said Hester weakly. "There's an airman's cafe over there. We'll have to try and book a passage like normal people." The cafe was just an ancient rusting airship gondola that had been bolted to the deck. A few metal tables stood in front beneath a stripy awning. Hurricane lamps were burning there, and an old aviator slumped, snoring in a chair. The only other customer was a sinister-looking Oriental woman in a long, red leather coat who sat in the shadows near the bar. In spite of the dark, she wore sunglasses, the tiny lenses black as the wing cases of beetles. She turned to stare at Tom as he walked up to the counter. A small man with a huge, drooping moustache was polishing glasses. He glanced up without much interest when Tom said, "I'm looking for a ship." "Where to?" "London," said Tom. "Me and my friend have to get back to London, and we have to leave tonight." "London, is it?" The man's moustachios twitched like the tails of two squirrels which had been shoved up his nose and was starting to get a bit restless. "Only ships with a licence from the London Merchants Guild can dock there. We've got nothing like that here. Staines ain't that sort of town." "Perhaps I may be of help," suggested a soft-sounding voice at Tom's shoulder. The woman in the red coat had come silently to his side, a lean, handsome woman with badgery slashes of white in her short black hair. Reflections of the hurricane lamps danced in her sunglasses, and when she smiled, Tom noticed their teeth were stained red. "I haven't a licence for London, but I am going to Airhaven. You could find a ship there that will take you the rest of the way. Have you some money?" Tom hadn't thought about that part. He rummaged in his tunic and fished out 2 tatty banknotes with the face of Quirk on the front and Magnus Chrome gazing sternly from the back. He had put them in his pocket the night he fell out of London, hoping to spend them at the catch party in Kensington Gardens. Here, under the fizzing hurricane lamps of the air harbour, they looked out of place, like toy money. The woman seemed to think so too. "Ah," she said. 20 quirks. But notes like that can only be spent in London. Not much use to a poor wandering skyfarer like me. Don't you have any gold or old tech?" Tom shrugged and mumbled something. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw some newcomers pushing their way between the tables. "Look, Uncle Rayland!" he heard one of them shout. "Here they are! We've got 'em!" Tom looked round and saw Rayland and a couple of his boys closing in, carrying heavy clubs. He grabbed Hester, who was leaning against the counter, barely conscious. One of the Speedwell men moved to cut off their escape, but the woman in the red coat barred his way, and Tom heard her say, "These are my passengers. I was just arranging a fee."
"There are slaves!"
shouted Rayland, pushing past her.
"Tom Nitsworthy and his friend found him in the out country fair and square, finders keepers."
Tom hurried Hester across the metal deck, past stairways leading up to quays where the airships moored. He could hear Rayland's men splitting up, shouting to each other as they searched. Then a grunt and a crash, as if one of them had fallen over. Good, he thought, but he knew that the others would soon find him. He dragged Hester up a short iron stairway to the quays. There were lights in some of the ships that hung at anchor there, and he had a vague idea about forcing his way aboard one of them and making them take him to London. But he had nothing that would serve as a weapon, and before he could look for one, there were feet ringing on the ladder behind him, and Rayland's voice saying,
"Please try and be reasonable, Mr. Nitsworthy. I don't want to have to hurt you. Fred," he added, "I've got the rotters cornered. Fred!"
Tom felt the hope drain out of him. There was no escape now. He stood there meekly as Rayland stepped forward into the light from the portholes of a nearby airship, hefting his club. Hester slumped against the dockside winch and moaned.
"It's only fair,"
said Rayland, as if he thought she was complaining.
"I don't like this slaving lark any more than you do, but times are hard, and we did catch you, there's no denying it."
Suddenly, faster than Tom would have thought possible, Hester moved. She dragged a metal lever out of the winch and swung it at Rayland. His club went whirling out of his hand and hit the deck with a glockenspiel sound, and the metal bar struck him, a glancing blow on the side of his head.
"Ah!"
he wailed, crumpling to the floor. Hester lurched forward and raised the bar again, but before she could bring it down on the old man's skull, Tom grabbed her arm. "Stop! You'll kill him!" "So?" She swung towards him, snaggleteeth bared, looking like a demented monkey. "So?" "He's right, my dear," said a gentle voice. "There's no need to finish him." Out of the shadows stepped the woman from the bar, her red coat swirling around her ankles as she walked towards them. "I think we should get aboard my ship before the rest of his people come looking for you." She had taken off her glasses. Her eyes were dark and almond-shaped, and fine webs of laughter lines crinkled at their corners when she smiled. "Besides," she added, "you intrigue me. Why is a Londoner wandering about in the hunting ground getting into trouble?" She held out her hand to Tom, a long, brown hand with the thin machinery of bones and tendons clearly visible, sliding under papery skin. "How do we know you won't betray us like Rayland did?" he demanded. "You don't, of course," she laughed. "You will just have to trust me." After Valentine and the Raylands, Tom didn't think he would ever be able to trust anybody again. But this strange foreigner was the only hope he had. "All right," he said, "but Rayland got my name wrong. It's Natsworthy." "And mine is Fang," said the woman. "Miss Anna Fang." She still had her hand outstretched, as if he was a scared animal she wanted to tame, and she was still smiling her alarming red smile. "My ship is on Air Quay 6. So they went with her, and somewhere in the oily shadows under the quays they stepped over Raylan's companions, who lay slumped against a stanchion with their heads lolling drunkly. "Are they?" whispered Tom. "Out cold," said Fang. "I'm afraid I just don't know my own strength." Tom wanted to stop and check that the men were all right, but she led him quickly past and up a ladder to Quay 6. The ship that hung at anchor there was not the elegant sky clipper Tom had been expecting. In fact, it was a little more than a shabby scarlet gas bag and a cluster of rusty engine pods bolted to a wooden gondola. "It's made of junk," he gasped. "Junk?" laughed Miss Fang. "Why, the Jenny Haniver is built from bits of the finest airships that ever flew. An envelope of silicon silk from a Shango clipper, twin Junet carrot aero engines off a Paris gunship, the reinforced gas cells of a Spitzerberg war balloon. It's amazing what you can find in the scrapyards." She led them up the gangplank into the cramped, spice-smelling gondola. It was just a narrow wooden tube with a flight deck at the front and Miss Fang's quarters at the stern, a jumble of other little cabins in between. Tom had to keep ducking to avoid braining himself on overhead lockers and dangerous-looking bundles of cables that hung from instrument panels on the roof. But the aviatrix flitted around with practised ease, mumbling in some strange foreign tongue as she set switches, pulled levers, and lit dim green electrics which filled the cabin with an aquarium glow. She laughed when she saw Tom's worried look. "That is Esperanto, the common language of the sky. It's a lonely life on the Bird Rose, and I have a habit of talking to myself." She pulled on a final lever, and the creak and sigh of gas valves echoed through the gondola. There was a clang as the magnetic docking clamps released, and the radio crackled into life and snapped.
"Jenny Haniver, this is the Staines Harbour Board. You're not cleared for departure."
But the Jenny Haniver was departing anyway. Tom felt his stomach turn over as she lifted into the midnight sky. He scrambled to a porthole and saw the market town falling away below. Then Speedwell came into view, and soon the whole cluster was spread out below him like a display of model towns in the museum.
"Jenny Haniver,"
insisted the loudspeaker.
"Return to your berth at once. We have a request from the Speedwell Town Council that you give up your passengers or they will be forced to—"
"Boring," trilled Miss Fang, flicking the radio off. A homemade rocket battery on the roof of Speedwell Town Hall spat a fizzing flock of missiles after them. 3 hissed harmlessly past, a 4th exploded off the starboard quarter, making the gondola swing like a pendulum, and the 5th came even closer. Anna Fang raised an eyebrow at that one, while Tom and Hester ducked for cover like frightened rabbits. Then they were out of range. The Jenny Haniver was climbing into the cold, clear spaces of the night, and the trading cluster was just a distant smear of light beneath the clouds.